Some of my ancestors who were born before the Soviet times received their education in madrasas. I know there was times they were not yet secular schools, so they were also taught basics of Islam. But in the times of USSR, there was a practical ban on religion. You know this. Practically everybody was irreligious, apart from very few people who would, attend the mosques in more, relaxed times. So my father was irreligious, but very honest and caring person who would always try to help others. He inherited great qualities from his parents. His father, my grandfather, made a great journey from a poor orphan to the prime minister of Kazakhstan because of great social lifts in USSR worked, but mainly because of his utmost industriousness and honesty and desire to develop further and further. I personally started gradually searching for the meaning and purpose of my life after my mother's early death, when I wasn't even 18. I attended events held both by local Kazakhstani imams, which were too trivial and self-concentrated on themselves, as well as visiting Turkish missionaries and American Protestants, which were more attractive. It was already after the break of the Soviet Union. But still, it wasn't really something I was looking for. Somehow I developed my own criterion of the true religion, is that it cannot teach things like hell is eternal, because this topic was especially unacceptable to, people in the former Soviet Union, because everybody regarded this as dishonest, it's unfair. And also for me as a mathematician who is interested in religion and philosophy, I even, built my own model that this is practically impossible, and then I put it logically as well, and many people find it very useful. Anyway, I realized that we already suffer too much in this world, which we did not create, but we were created without asking us if we wanted to live in it. Of course, we should not violate others' rights, but even in this case, all our misdeeds could be counted, and the total damage could be calculated precisely, which would never be infinite, but finite. I first heard about Jamaat Ahmadi in 1990 from my then closest friend and classmate. He said that his father's friend and coursemate, Mr. Elimis, who later became the first Ahmadi of Kazakhstan, visited Europe recently and came across Muslims. And he mentioned something like Ahmadiyya brothers. I like the word brothers and the story. we felt thirsty, and hungry for spiritual food, but we were afraid of religion, and especially of mullahs and priests, etc., because we regard this as like a business for them, and they don't really care about us. And this was the common attitude in the former Soviet Union. And so after Gorbachev initiated perestroika and some human rights and freedoms, Soviet Union citizens were allowed to go abroad for tourism. And in those years, there were only few touristic options. So one of them was a cruise along the North Sea ports. And it played a vital role in my journey to Ahmadiyyat, not because I myself went for such a tour, but in 1990, Yelemisav was about to take this cruise along the North Sea ports, and before embarking it, he wanted to find out if there were any ethnic Kazakhs who lived in these port cities of the North Sea. Luckily, there was a person to ask from. It was an ethnic Kazakh who just came to Kazakhstan from Europe to visit with an intention to settle down. It was none else but a living legend who didn't live long, unfortunately, but dedicated his short, brilliant life to the service of his beloved Kazakh nation, Mr. Mustafa Öztürk, 6-time world champion in Taekwondo and 7th Dan black belt, and a deep believer. He was an ethnic Kazakh whose forefathers had to flee the communist regime almost a century ago, all the long way through China, India, Pakistan, before settling down in Turkey, where he was born. Mustafa was born. To cut short, Mr. Elimes took phone numbers and contact addresses from ethnic Kazakhs living in Europe. Among them, there was Mr. Saidullah living in Göteborg. When Mr. Elimis reached Göteborg and called him, Mr. Saidullah immediately came to the port. After some time, they found each other, and Mr. Saidullah took Mr. Elimis to his place. They enjoyed each other's company. In between, a phone call buzzed, and it was a call from the missionary of Jamaat Ahmadiyya. I guess it must have been Sayyid Kamal Yusufzad, though he didn't remember this incident when I asked him in 2015. Perhaps because he never met Mr. Elimis then. He only phoned to Mr. Saidullah and exchanged messages through Mr. Saidullah, who also acted as an interpreter because Mr. Elimis never spoke any English or Swedish. So Sayyid Kamal Yusufzad sent an invitation through Mr. Saidullah to Mr. Elimis to attend the Juma namaz next day, but there was no chance because next day Mr. Elimis had to embark again on his ship and proceed to the next port. So he apologized, but Said Kamal Yusufzai wasn't ready to accept a defeat. He asked which port was the next one and got a reply that it was Edinburgh, with details of timing, etc. He said that our community in Scotland would come to receive them at the port and invite them to be their guests. So Mr. LMS, he invited whole the tourist group, and there's a picture. It was very interesting to look at how the Soviet people with their Soviet type clothes in the Glasgow mosque, because Jamaat took them by buses to Glasgow, and gave them food, gave them a Russian translation of Quran, which was just released a couple of years before that, even though there was no even a single Russian-speaking or post-Soviet Ahmadi yet in the Soviet Union. It was translated by non-Soviets. And Mr. Elimas tried to visit Jalsa the same year, but couldn't. The British didn't issue the visa. But next year he, alhamdulillah, visited, and he became the first Ahmadi of Kazakhstan and Central Asia in the new era of collapsing USSR. And because you know that there was first community in 1920s, but that was unfortunately could not continue because of the atheist regime. So after that, the first central missionary visited ex-USSR, including our city Almaty. It was Muniruddin Shamsab. So Mr. Yelemisab, the first convert, invited him to stay at his place and not to waste money on the hotel. And Muniruddin Shamsab agreed. And Mr. Yelemis invited all his friends to introduce him to them. And then all the friends invited Muniruddin Shamsab to their places one by one, including my friend's father. And when they invited him, they invited me as well, mostly to act as an interpreter, because I already was a professional interpreter, working for, studying and working, and also sometimes working as the translator. So when I met him for the first time, the topic was exactly which I mentioned, and it was whether hell was eternal according to Islam or not. And this was the first time I ever heard that that according to Quran and Hadith, it is not the case, because all the previous preachers, our local imams, etc., and the Christians, of course, they all said no, hell is eternal, because there are some enemies of God who cannot be pardoned. So this was exactly the case where I found almost mathematically, but of course it was search of my soul, which helped. Of course, Allah gave me sort of these instruments, alhamdulillah, which I'm using, by the way, myself now as a missionary. So yes, I joined Jamaat in 1996 later on in London when I was a student at LSE, and where I also did not like the pro-capitalist, this system, because I know that the truth is in between. And now I know it is Islamic economic system. So anyway, my journey wasn't easy, but alhamdulillah, I have been enjoying it utterly, because it my way. I felt every inch of it. So yeah, that's briefly about my journey.